Hi there, welcome back. Today, I want to go through something that's a really important aspect of running a micro school that can feel somewhat disconnected at times. And that is, as you're going through building the process of building the micro school, you have to keep in mind that it has to be structured as a legal business of sorts. You're operating a business and conducting it as such. Now, business doesn't necessarily mean for profit. There's a couple different ways we can do this. So we're going to look at different ways to establish the micro school. First is just having a legal entity under which the micro school can operate. Many people are going to choose to create a new legal entity that can take the form of an LLC, a corporation, uh, a partnership, professional partnership. Like there's any number of legal business entities that you could use to start and operate a micro school, depending on the number of people involved, depending on the number of decision makers involved, also depending on if you're working with existing partners already. So the basic format, however, is that you're a micro school would likely originally form as an LLC or a limited liability company in the state of Arizona. If for tax purposes they wanted to then pursue a nonprofit status, that's possible. That's done through the IRS at the federal level. So a couple things to keep in mind here is neither of those things are recommendations that I'm giving. This is simply a statement of what many micro school operators choose to do. Nothing that I'm telling you here should be taken as legal advice. I strongly encourage you to talk with your own personal legal counsel before picking a business structure or deciding on a liability or a tax liability status. But ideally, you're going to want to form a new entity that is going to operate as the micro school. However, some of you may have access to an existing legal entity, including those that may have nonprofit status, such as churches or existing schools. You can operate your micro school underneath that existing entity as long as it fits your legal charter and as long as you maintain all of your current legal accounting practices and tax reporting requirements and all of those requirements. Uh, Operating as a nonprofit can take a little bit more time, can take a little have a little bit more requirements, but it can also make some things easier as it gives you access to more broad funding options. Often there's various grants that you may have access to that for-profit entities will not. So just keep that in mind. For-profit entities, you'll operate your micro school effectively as a private school business. Again, talk to legal counsel, talk to a an accountant before making any of these decisions. Just understand that you will need to create a legal entity. Now I want to dive in a little bit to how we structure the organization internally. Starting a micro school, one lone micro school, is generally very simple. And that might be a great place for people to get started. However, you will find quickly that as you're able to run a successful micro school, you will have families that come to you and want to enroll, and you don't have capacity to serve those families yet. So, how is your organization going to grow? Um, there's a couple different options here that I want to show you. First is independent, where you may have a number of different schools. They operate autonomously. Each has their own learning coach or learning guide, but they will all operate underneath the same legal umbrella. So maybe my community church has a nonprofit. We operate a micro school here, but we also operate a micro school that Miss Smith operates out of her home. We have another micro school that Mr. Gonzalez operates out of the community center. and they each have their own name and their own brand and their own identity, but they all operate underneath our same legal framework. So that's one option that you can use. Another one is a micro school network. This is common in where you are going to have multiple micro schools, but want to maintain the same branding and the same consistency. Uh, if you're operating within a community church as well, you may find that your community church has a partnership with another community church on the other side of town or on the other side of the state. And you may have these two micro schools that are operating quasi independently, but they're using the same learning tools. They're structured the same way, they're using the same curriculum, and sometimes those micro schools will then get together and do activities together. So they're interconnected and they're using the same learning model, but generally they operate independently from day to day. You may also choose to have a hierarchical organizational structure. If you're looking to operate 10 or 15 or even more micro schools than that, a hierarchical approach might be the best one, in that you structure as one school with multiple locations, multiple classes within your single school. What this enables you to do is to save on some administrative labor costs and overhead there. Again, same thing, you'll be using one similar learning model, but it's all operating as one school, just on diverse campuses here. And you'll see in the staffing where that really comes into play. So we're going to talk about this. The first is administration. So whether or not you necessarily require a full administrative staff, you're going to have administrative tasks that you need to be aware of. So these are going to be things like uh, registration and enrollment. These are going to be things like communicating end of year grades or progress of assessment to parents. This will also be some of the business aspects. Who's going to take care of your accounting and bookkeeping? Who's going to take care of making sure that you've done all of your taxes correctly? This is going to be administrative side of things. Who's going to make sure that you've ordered sufficient quantities of toilet paper? Some of these administrative tasks are going to be necessary. Okay. So you may find, if you're operating a micro school as a sole independent operator, that you simply have to block time out of your day to tend to the administrative tasks that need to be taken care of day to day. If that becomes overwhelming, this may be an opportunity to hire someone to work on some of these administrative tasks for you. An office assistant, an office manager of sorts. Hiring an office manager for one independent micro school is probably going to cut pretty deeply into your financial situation. This is where, if you had 3, 4, 5 micro schools kind of all connected together, having one office manager that kind of handled all of the administrative affairs for each one of those would greatly reduce the financial impact of that on your micro school. The next thing is going to be instructional staff. Every single micro school is going to need instructional staff. These are the adults in the room who are working directly with the students to either provide educational or educational instruction or supporting us instruction for the students. So this may be the primary educator, well, whether you call them a learning coach, a guide, a pod leader, whatever. Sometimes you'll need a co-educator, where you'll need an assistant for that primary educator, especially during some more intense activities. Possibly assistants or one-on-one aids. You may find that you have students that need one-on-one aids primarily for behavioral regulation and things like that. This is going to be determined by the needs of your students, by the needs of your family. So understanding who your micro school is going to serve. If you're going to have a high number of special needs students, you probably need a lower student to adult ratio. I would recommend no more than 5-1 if you have several special needs students in a classroom where there are not many special needs students or neurodivergent students. a ratio of maybe 10 students per one adult is still desirable. But also, it depends on the level of experience that they have and what other additional support tools are you going to need. Do you need a standalone PE teacher for physical exercise or for physical activities for 10 students? Can they free play together? Is that going to be adequate? Maybe if you have a network of 10 micro schools and you have a PE teacher that visits two of them each day and travels around to the various micro schools, now it might be cost effective to have that instructional staff there. You might also consider doing this kind of relationship with other forms of instructional staff, reading specialists, math tutors, maybe speech or occupational therapists, again, depending on the needs of your students and your families. Another thing to consider, because it is inevitable, what are you going to do when one of your instructional staff is absent? They get sick, there's an illness, there's a death in the family, any of this stuff. How are you going to prepare and plan for those? And how are you going to have people prepared to fill those roles when you need it? Okay. The last piece is support staff. So this would be anything that falls outside of instructional administrative, janitorial, food preparation, outside services that you may generally contract out, accounting, marketing, anything like that. If you need any specialized design, hire some of those things out. And again, ideally, if you're working within an existing institution, a community church, or a community service organization, you can share some of these services with that existing organization. But sometimes, if you have a much larger micro school network, you may need to contract this out um, with to serve all of that the micro schools in your network. Okay. Um, Again, what are the tasks that you're really trying to ensure happen? What are the things that can be done uh, in-house versus the things that you need on a short-term basis or the things that you need on a long-term basis? Um, Ideally, again, a lot of these things are tasks that you either hire out or work with an existing network of micro schools to hire these out in a contract with multiple, so they can serve multiple campuses at once. The last thing that I want to add on here is there's a lot of opportunities where you don't necessarily have to hire out this work, but you can invite families and students even to contribute to some of this work. You can ask students to spend 10 to 15 minutes every day cleaning up the classroom before they go, and that, sweeping the floor, wiping off or disinfecting surfaces, anything like that. Maybe you don't need to hire janitorial services. Perhaps you have adults who are, members of the families of the students that you have who have some of these additional skills. Not everything that needs to be done professionally or needs to be done professionally every time. Even something as critical as accounting, can we teach students how to do the books and put students in charge of those things? I'm not going to, don't take that as accounting advice, please. I'm using that as an example to demonstrate that sometimes even very important tasks can be things that we include our families on and our students in as well. Um, Having daily routines with students in terms of cleaning, but then also asking parents or their to make family activities weekly, monthly, or even yearly routines for families to come down and contribute some time, both in like facilities maintenance, but also to do some of these other tasks that you might not have the ability to do on your own. One thing, it helps your students build real world skills. And second, and this is probably more important than those skills in this context, but the second thing is that it helps to build investment in your micro school and the success of your micro school on the part of your families. As they're asked to give, they're asked to contribute, they feel much more a part of the micro school community. And as they feel a part of the community, they're much more dedicated to the success of the micro school. and you're able to get them to help out in other ways as well. Quick little overview of all of the various forms of labor that you may need within your micro school, how the structure is going to influence the various labor needs that you have, and then also building the legal entity or creating a legal entity is going to influence, I'll say, the number of micro schools that you're connected with, the number of micro schools that you operate, the structure of the relationship between those micro schools. Many different things are involved in that decision. So again, this is for you to be aware of options and opportunities. None of this is to be taken as any kind of legal advice. Please talk to your partners, talk to legal counsel, and seek as much direct professional help as you need in order to make these decisions effectively. Thank you.